Adam left us the moment his head bounced off the pavement.
It came up on the TV that 2 men had been arrested for murder, and she said, "Please don't tell me that's you." I told her that it was. I tragically killed somebody with a single punch.
I lost my brother to a single punch in 2009.
So if you would like to meet face to face, please pull back your curtain in 3, 2, 1.
I was born in Nottingham, in an area called the Meadows. Well, it's now a notorious council estate in inner city Nottingham, but it gets its name from being literally pastures of meadows, which kind of, there's a strange juxtaposition between the name and how it is now. And although I grew up in a single parent household, my mum and dad divorced when I was about 7, I had a pretty good childhood, sheltered from the rest of the kind of, what would I say, trauma of my estate, until I got to secondary school, and then start to kind of be tempted by unhelpful peer groups, mainly because I felt like I didn't fit in to the broader society. I was quite a disillusioned young person by the time I got into my teenage years. I was diagnosed with ADHD and autism, and I didn't really know how that, and dyslexia, I didn't really know how those kind of diagnoses impacted the way I see the world and communicate and learn. And so I was excluded from 2 secondary schools, and as I said, slowly felt like I belonged most in my peer group of other people that felt the same way. Pleasing my mates became more important than pleasing my mum. I started getting more conflict with her as I went throughout my teenage years. She wanted the best for me. She didn't want me hanging around with those friends. She didn't want me, you know, she was losing her boy basically, and she didn't know how to maintain our relationship. Started to feel more angry with myself as much as the world, and just a bit disillusioned, and that just manifested itself in many teenagers really, like locking myself in my bedroom and playing video games and smoking too much weed and, you know, engaged in low-level antisocial behaviour as a young person, just to try and create some sort of fun and entertainment to kind of fill the void of a lack of purpose or a lack of self-worth.
And can you tell me about the night of the one-punch incident? Why were you out that evening?
I was out celebrating a friend's 18th birthday. He was the last one in our group to turn 18. So we were all like happy to be able to officially bring him out with us with his own ID. It was a hot day. We were out drinking in lots of bars throughout the day, and there's older people in my group that had started introducing us to other substances, and then it becomes a bit of a blur towards as the sun goes down and moves into the evening. Got a phone call from my friend saying that there was trouble, and me being the person I was back then, I always felt like I had to have my mates back. I ran down to where they were in the Market Square in Nottingham and didn't really know what was going on. Saw what I perceived to be some sort of standoff or confrontation. Sadly didn't ask why, didn't attempt to break it up, just ran in and threw a punch. And then ran away. I didn't even wait around to see what happened. I just realised that I needed to get out of the city centre. The CCTV cameras everywhere. I kind of like came to my senses after I threw the punch and was like, why have I done that? So I just ran and just kept running till I got back into my estate. And then didn't think anything of it. The next day, my friends came round and were bragging about it, just saying, yes, one punch, you knocked him out. Yeah, I was getting praise basically, which kind of in my own weird world felt nice. And then I had some texts running away that night from my friend saying that he was unconscious on the floor. So I was a bit worried about that. And they said that an ambulance came, but then we didn't hear anything else. And they said that he would like regain consciousness, and so I didn't think anything else of it. And that's all I understood. I thought that was just, that nothing really serious had happened. My mum, she'd been saving up some money to take me and my little brother on holiday. So we went on this holiday to Tenerife and had a really nice time. Me and my mum reconnected a little bit, because I was out of the estate, I wasn't speaking to my friends. And I felt quite bad that, I wasn't paying for myself to go on holiday, or I wasn't contributing to the household, or that I'd been letting her down. And we kind of rebonded a little bit. And then I came back from that holiday with my mum, and in the days that followed, I started to hear from friends that the police were raiding some of my associates, and one of my friends, the only one who had a job, called me one morning to say that his house had been raided and that he felt like the police were going to be coming for me. And he said, I think it might have something to do with that night that you threw a punch, which was a month previously. And so, I panicked and kind of left my mum's house and tried to find out more information as to what was going on. Until later that day, the police did come to my mum's house. They called off my mum's number, and so I answered the phone, and it was the police in the house saying that there was nothing to worry about and to hand myself in at the police station. I went and handed myself in at the police station, and then that's where it was all confirmed to me that I was being arrested on suspicion of murder.
How did it feel to hear the word murder?
Terrible. And I was just in shock and disbelief. I thought I was dreaming. And they put me in the police custody cell. I was just like having panic attacks and in shock and disbelief, thinking thoughts like, how do I tell my mum this, and have I ruined my life, and am I going to be going to prison, and this isn't really what I want from life, even though I didn't really know what I wanted from life. And just, everything kind of flashing at a million miles an hour through my head and trying to make sense of what had happened and try and remember that night and piece it together. Had they got the wrong person? Was it really me? Until, the more and more interviews I had with the police officers, it just started sinking that, it was me and it was that night, and coming to that realisation.
Adam was, obviously Mike's big brother, but he'd have done out for anyone. He didn't have a nasty bone in his body. He never raised a hand in anger in his life, and he was just generally a really, really beautiful human being.
And what are some of your fondest memories of your time with Adam as an older brother?
Doing mean things to him. One of the favourites was fighting in a pint glass and holding it to his face. But we used to go walking, all sorts of, playing football. We used to laugh a lot.
Do you remember the last time that you saw Adam?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I can probably remember the last time I saw him, but I've never remembered, what my last words were to him. Now, I know they won't have been harsh words, but, were they kind enough words for last words? I don't know.
How old was Adam on
He was 24.
the night that he went out?
Yeah. So he just moved back to Blackburn. They called it an old boys football team. So the college he went to, my mum worked at, the team, from when he was actually at college, had started a football team. And I think they'd done the first training, and a group of them were going out to celebrate, Adam coming back to town, really. And the plan was that to be into town, and then as my mum was away, they were all going to go back up to my mum's house and party, I suppose. Yeah. There was 3 of them sat outside the nightclub having a chat, just on some sort of stone benches. They weren't being loud, aggressive, causing any bother. From the other group, along came a young lady. She sat down and she started to chat. Now, she hadn't come on a wind-up, I don't think she was there, with an agenda to cause trouble. It was just 4 people chatting. The problem starts with the arrival of a 16-year-old boy who just comes across and starts shouting, "Shut up, shut up, shut up," yeah. What they should have done is ignored him, told him to do, whatever. They didn't. Unfortunately, one of Adam's mates basically traded insults, and there was an offer and acceptance of a fight. Adam gets involved by pulling his mate to one side who's agreed to have this fight and getting him to unplug his head, to take a minute to back down. And they convince him to walk away. So, 999 times out of 1,000 more, that'll be the end of the story. Unfortunately, this time it wasn't. It's at this point, the girls basically encourage, peer pressure, I don't know how to put it, they basically banter the lad into picking up a flower and throwing it at the lad he had the argument with. And he turned around and spat towards the lad. And that gave permission for the 2 19-year-olds to come running across the road. And as you see on the CCTV, there's a scuffle, nothing particular. And during this, Adam's trying to stop the 16-year-old lad during the fight, trying to walk him away, hands down by his side. And it's during that, the 16-year-old turns, hits Adam. And like these things are, most often it's not the punch that kills, it's the pavement that comes. Now, there was obviously CCTV, there was witnesses, two guys sat in a wagon, waiting for everyone to go home so they could clean the streets. They say, you could see Adam, he wasn't being aggressive, he was simply just trying to stop the lad joining the fight, trying to talk to him. And it's just that stupidity, isn't it? That one thoughtless sense of, unprovoked and drunken violence changes everything for so many people.
And how did you find out that Adam had been punched?
How did I find out? So I was at a festival, so there was 0 phone reception at the festival. Basically, my dad was sent out to the festival to come and find me. So the first thing he had to do is, I suppose, blag his way in past security, 10,000 people. He walks up and down. And eventually he bumps into someone who knows me, and he's brought up to the van. So the day starts with the banging on the side of the van, Tim, it's Adam, we've got to go. I can remember it very clearly, there's a 45-minute journey from the festival to Blackburn Hospital, and that's probably, the longest single journey of my life. Now, we were rushed into critical care, and the first feeling was it's going to be all right. You could see his heart beating, his chest rising and falling. There was colour, in his face, the warmth, of his touch. Now for me, you know, it was only when I realised that that wasn't Adam and that was the machines. You know, for me, that's when the world stopped turning. Adam was basically brain dead. I believe that Adam left us the moment his head bounced off the pavement. But it was 2 o'clock the next day when life support was taken away, basically. We went as a family. We spent some time with him as a family, said his last goodbyes. And then we left me mum and Dave with him for them to say their last goodbyes. And then, yeah, he was taken. You know, it wasn't a switch off. It was more of he was then taken, you know, for his organs to be harvested. So it was a horrific.
What did you say to Adam?
I just told him goodbye and that I loved him, you know, and that I'd make him proud.
And how did it impact your family in the days after Adam's death?
I guess there was shock, you know. It's just, you know that, you know, you've never seen him again. There's the anger, the hurt, you know, retribution. There's all sorts that goes through your head, isn't there? And the main one is that loss, isn't it? That sense of loss, you know, that, you know, I'm never going to be able to basically, you know, well, tell him I love him, you know, say goodbye.
I went to see my mum at home, and she was watching the East Midlands BBC News channel, and it came up on the TV that 2 men had been arrested for murder, and she said, "Please don't tell me that's you." And then I told her that it was, and she just broke down. And I thought she was partly breaking down for me, but she was also breaking down for the other family. She was saying, I can't believe that what that other person's family must be going through. And I would argue with her. I'd say, I can't think about that. I don't even know how to think about that. I wasn't the best at thinking about other people's thoughts and feelings and putting myself in other people's shoes back then. And so I didn't really know how to deal with that. And so it just came across as me not being really looking very remorseful and trying to deflecting and just being angry, because I just didn't know how to deal with those feelings. And then, on the advice of my solicitor and the overwhelming evidence that was being gathered, I went guilty and was charged with manslaughter. It was reduced from murder to manslaughter. And then I waited sentencing.
And how was it seeing the family of the person that you killed in court?
I didn't know that they were going to be there when I went into the courtroom and into the glass dock. I just kind of I was looking around the room, and there's lots of people looking at me, and I didn't know if they were journalists or reporters or my victim's family or members of the community. So I was just really paranoid and looking at the floor. I couldn't really make eye contact with anybody. So much so that I got sentenced, and I didn't even know how long I got sentenced for. I kind of just blanked out the whole process and had to ask the prison guard when I went down to the cells how long I'd been sentenced for. I was sentenced to 30 months in prison, 2.5 years, which was the lower end of the sentencing guidelines, and other things, I guess, that played a part with that I gave an early guilty plea and hadn't had any previous criminal convictions. On the anniversary of the day James passed away, a vicar, a chaplaincy came to see me from in the prison. They opened my cell door and said, reminded me of what day it was and whether or not I'd like to come down to the chaplaincy to have some time to reflect. And I took him up on the offer and went down. And he said a prayer. And I used to go to school, Sunday school and church with my mum when I was a kid. But yeah, I found some peace in saying a prayer for them and his family and me and mine, away from the rowdy wings and shouting. I just tried to think about the pain. And so I could see the pain that it was causing my mum and my family, and was just trying to apply that to a family I'd never known or didn't even know what they looked like, but attempting it. And I felt sad.
The worst, other than the actual killing, was the lack of responsibility. When he handed himself into the police station the next day, first argument was self-defence. It was 3 weeks of court, 8 months down the line, where we didn't have a voice, or Adam didn't have a voice. And as a family, we had to sit and listen to, him being described as a threatening bully, little 16-year-old, big 24-year-old man. And that was horrific. If he'd have just taken responsibility, that damage done, in that 3 weeks of court and that horror, I'd probably feel differently about it.
And at that time, Tim, how did you feel towards the young man that had taken your brother's life?
Just, total fury and anger. I spent so much time with it there, just swallowing the anger. I did things I can't change, One of the big things for me that I regret is that at no point did I actually ask for some professional help. If I had done, maybe some of the choices, some of the stuff that I did, wouldn't have been so bad. The end result for me was basically I don't hold all the responsibility, but, I have a massive responsibility, because the choices I made for the breakdown of my marriage, through grief, through anger, through, lashing out at the world, I guess. And I hate the fact that I only get to spend half the lives with my two little humans. I don't get them to put them to bed every night, tell them I love them, get up with them in the morning every day. It's half the lives, and that, is my responsibility, and it's not something I can change.
So you've both had the chance to hear each other's stories, and now is the time to decide if you would like to meet face to face to speak further. So if you would like to meet, please pull back your curtain in 3, 2, 1.
How are you doing?
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. First of all, thank you for sharing. You mentioned that you wanted to make your brother proud, and I don't want to speak out of context, but from hearing your story and where you've got to, I'm sure he is. I made a commitment when I wanted to try and take responsibility that I'd one day like to look in the mirror and be proud of myself. So I know how difficult that can be, and I'm still working on that, to be honest. I didn't know where I'd find the common ground with you, but I really resonated with the part that you shared about your regret for not asking for help, personal help, earlier. That's my other biggest regret, is that although I, for the last at least 10 years, have been campaigning to raise awareness of these issues and trying to help other people, other young people, other 15, 16-year-olds to make better choices, to stay in school, to ask for help, and people in prison to take accountability and try and change the justice system more broadly. I've not always been taking my own advice in terms of asking for help. I felt like as long as I'm helping other people and not causing any more kind of harm in terms of like aggression towards anyone else or committing any further crimes, that will be okay. But I've not been okay. And it's kind of, you know, had repercussions on like my family and kids and children, and not, you know, necessarily seeing them as much as I'd like and the rest of it. So
yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah. It took me a long time to sort of, you know, get my head around how I felt, but that getting to that point where I was comfortable in my own skin again was, you know, like a milestone, and where things started to get better for me. You know, and we can't stay, you know, angry forever, can we? You know, and for me, that staying angry, the only person I was really damaging was myself. So to let some of that go has been a really big step for me.
Yeah.
You know, all that hurt, that anger, you know, the lashing out of the world.
Yeah.
You know, the only person I was actually damaging was myself. So, yeah, you know, I forgive the boy that killed Adam, you know, I forgive him totally, wholly. Now, I haven't told him, you know, I've no intention of telling him, you know, I don't care, you know, one little iota what that lad thinks about my forgiveness. You know, like I said, the lesson, you know, hard-fought lesson was that simple, you know, forgiveness doesn't belong to the person who's wrong, it's yours.
Yeah.
So, have you sort of, I don't know if it's the right word, have you forgiven yourself for that act?
Yeah, there's a part of me that feels like I shouldn't forgive myself. And that if I say I forgive myself, then it's disrespectful.
Right, okay. I disagree with that, but you know, it's nice to know that we are two sides of the same coin. We're both pushing the same direction. I, you know, wish that the young man that killed Adam, you know, hadn't gone the road down his own where, you know, not taking the responsibility. But it, you know, in some ways, for me, you know, it's good to know that someone who did something that happened to my brother is pushing in the right direction and trying to make the same impact that I am. So yeah, it's been really positive.
Yeah.
I know, you know, for a fact, because I loved Adam all his life and, you know, lived with him most of his life, he'd be happy that we're having this conversation, and I'm sure, you know, he'd be supporting it, and I'm sure, you know, he'd be proud of the work that we're both doing, you know.
Yeah.
Lovely to meet you.
You too. Thank you.
So when he actually walked me through the murder, it wasn't what I had expected. It was like he was talking about some painting he had made that he was really proud of. He told me like with passion, like he was talking about a masterpiece. He seemed like excited.